Okay, so let's unpack this. There's this huge piece of legislation moving through Washington.
Right.
And, big bills like this one, they don't land the same for everyone.
No, definitely not. Depending on who you are, your situation, these big policy shifts can mean really different things.
Exactly. And that's kind of why we're doing this deep dive, right? We're looking at these sources you sent over about this major bill. The official name is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, H.R. 1 2025.
Yeah, and the analyses in there, they suggest it pulls together some really big changes. Taxes, healthcare, social programs, government spending. It's a lot.
It really is. So our mission today, just using the material you provided, is to try and cut through all that complexity, figure out what's really in it, and, specifically who seems to win and who seems to lose according to the analysis in these sources.
Exactly, just focusing on what these analyses report.
And where does it stand right now?
Yeah.
I saw the sources mention it passed the House.
Yeah, but barely. Really narrow margin, 215 to 214, just Republican votes, the sources say. And now it's over in the Senate.
Okay, so still very much in play. Things could change.
Definitely. Now, just to get the big picture here, the sources explain this kind of bill. It's often used for major tax and spending changes all at once. Budget reconciliation, they call it.
Right.
And a key piece of analysis mentioned is from the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO.
Yes, the CBO. And they're the nonpartisan scorekeepers, right? They look at the financial side of things.
That's the idea, yeah. They analyze the costs.
So what did their analysis find, according to the sources, the overall cost?
Well, the CBO analysis, as reported in this material, it says the bill would increase the federal deficit by about $3.0 trillion over the next 10 years.
$3 trillion. Okay, and that includes interest costs.
That includes interest, yeah.
Okay, so deficit, that just means the government's spending more than it's taking in, basically. So this bill adds quite a bit to that gap over a decade, according to that analysis. Okay, so with that number in mind, let's use the sources to see where the money's flowing. Who seems to benefit the most here?
Well, what really jumps out from the material consistently is the focus on tax cuts.
Okay.
And the analyses presented argue these cuts are heavily skewed towards the wealthy. That's the term used.
Skewed. That's a strong word. Do the sources explain how the analyses get to that conclusion?
They do. A big chunk of the bill is extending the 2017 tax cuts.
Okay.
And the analyses cited in the sources, they conclude those cuts already primarily benefited higher income folks.
And there's data in the sources to back that up.
Yeah, some specific points, like reports indicating the top 10% and even the wealthiest 0.1% get significant benefits. One analysis specifically estimates that something like $1.5 trillion of the total tax relief goes just to the top 5% of taxpayers over 10 years.
Wow. 1.5 trillion for the top 5%. Okay. And the sources also mention specific things for wealthy individuals or business owners.
Yes, exactly. Like extending estate tax cuts. That mostly helps wealthy families, passing down large inheritances.
Right.
And also extending and expanding something called the pass-through business deduction.
Okay, the pass-through deduction. What does that analysis say it does, simply?
Well, the analysis in the sources says it benefits business owners. It's basically a tax break that lets owners of certain businesses deduct part of their business income. So less of that income gets taxed at their personal rate.
Got it. And what about other business tax changes mentioned in the material?
The sources list a few, like reviving bonus depreciation, R&E expensing, loosening interest limits, allowing expensing for factories.
Okay, sounds complex.
It is, but the analysis presented in the material boils it down. These changes primarily benefit business owners and shareholders, and those tend to be higher income individuals.
Right. Now, the sources also list some new tax cuts, things that maybe sound like they're aimed at regular workers, like no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, higher standard deduction for seniors, no tax on car loans.
Oh, and expanding health savings account HSAs and something called Trump accounts.
Yeah, the sources do mention those, but the analyses presented are pretty critical. They basically state that while these might sound good, the actual dollar benefit is minimal for most people, especially for lower income folks.
Minimal compared
to the huge tax cuts going to the wealthy, and really importantly, compared to the cuts happening elsewhere in the bill to public services. That's the trade-off highlighted in the analysis.
I see. Okay. So beyond taxes, the material also flags some big increases in government spending in certain areas.
That's right. The bill reportedly includes a $144 billion increase for defense.
Wow.
And $79 billion more for border security.
And the sources say who benefits from that spending. Well, the indication is defense contractors, border security contractors. The material mentions funding for shipbuilding, missile defense, border wall stuff, more personnel for CBP and ICE.
Okay, so pulling this thread together, the analyses cited in the sources seem to paint a picture where the benefits, the wins, are really tilted towards the top income groups and specific industries like defense.
That's definitely the consistent finding presented in the analyses we looked at. The material suggests, a prioritization of financial benefits for the wealthy via tax cuts, plus boosts in defense and border spending.
While maybe offering smaller tax benefits elsewhere.
Relatively small, yeah. And understanding that flow of money and tax benefits, based only on these sources, it does seem to show a particular set of priorities in how the bill is reportedly structured.
Okay, so that covers who the sources indicate stands to gain. But there's another side to this. The material also paints a pretty stark picture for other groups, right, who faces challenges or, potentially loses out.
Yeah, this is really the other critical piece, according to the analyses in this material. While some folks benefit, the sources strongly indicate certain groups get disproportionately harmed.
Harmed how?
The material points very clearly to major cuts in programs that millions of Americans depend on for, like, basic needs.
Okay, let's maybe start with Medicaid. That's the government health program for low-income people. What changes does the bill make there based on the sources you shared?
So the sources detail a few big ones. First, work requirements.
Ah, okay, work requirements.
Yeah, the bill reportedly requires states to make adults on Medicaid work or look for work if they don't have disabilities.
And what does the analysis say the impact of that would be?
The analysis cited estimates this could cause a lot of people to lose health insurance coverage overall. The numbers in the sources range from 8.6 million up to 16 million people losing coverage by 2034.
16 million, that's that's massive. And does the analysis explain why they lose coverage? Is it just because people aren't working?
Well, this is crucial. The sources explicitly state that analyses of similar rules tried in states before. They found people often lost coverage, not because they weren't working, but because of, like, paperwork problems, administrative hurdles.
Ah, so the bureaucracy trips them up.
Exactly. The material notes that many people on Medicaid are already working, often in low-wage jobs, or they're caregivers. And navigating these complex systems is just really hard.
That's a really important detail reported in the sources. What other Medicaid changes are mentioned?
The bill also reportedly increases how often states have to check if people still qualify. These eligibility checks or redeterminations.
Okay.
And the sources point out that when these checks were ramped up after the COVID emergency ended, millions lost coverage, even people who were still eligible.
Again, because of the process itself.
It seems like it, yeah. Just navigating the system, getting the right documents in on time.
Yeah.
It's tough, especially for vulnerable people. That's what the analysis in the material highlights.
Okay. Anything else on Medicaid?
Yeah. The bill also reportedly adds new costs for people, copays.
Copays for low-income people.
Right. For seeing a doctor, getting care. The sources call it a potential sick tax.
Why sick tax?
Because they state that analyses show even really small fees can stop poor people from getting medical care they need. It creates a financial barrier.
And there was something about provider taxes, too.
Yes, the sources say the bill would freeze states from using certain taxes on healthcare providers, taxes they sometimes use to help fund Medicaid.
And the impact of that.
The material indicates it could lead to rural hospitals closing, making it harder for people in those areas to get any care. There's even a quote mentioned from Senator Hawley suggesting rural hospital closures are basically like a benefit cut for those communities.
Wow. Okay, so if you sum up the Medicaid impacts reported in these sources, what's the takeaway?
The sources state it's a combination of things, work rules, more frequent checks, new costs, potential hospital closures, all leading to potentially significant loss of health insurance.
Which means
Delayed care, worse health outcomes. And one source even estimates 51,000 preventable deaths every year because people lose access to health care.
51,000. That's an incredibly stark number from the analysis. Okay, shifting from healthcare, the sources also talk about SNAP, food stamps, basically.
Right. The program that gives low-income folks money on a special debit card, an EBT card, to buy groceries.
And the sources say it's pretty vital for preventing hunger.
Yeah, helps millions, the material notes.
So what does the bill reportedly do to SNAP?
Well, the sources indicate a major funding cut, like $267 billion less in federal spending over 10 years.
Huge cut.
Yeah. And it also reportedly tightens work requirements again and makes other changes to who qualifies.
And the impact of cutting S&AP like that, according to the sources.
Well, the sources say it means significantly less food aid for millions of families and individuals, which risks more hunger, poor diets, health problems. Especially bad for kids, the analysis notes, exacerbating childhood hunger.
Okay. The sources you provided also seem to focus quite a bit on immigrants and families.
They do, yeah. The material states that lawfully present immigrants would lose access to certain healthcare tax credits.
Which ones?
The ACA premium tax credits. The subsidies that help people buy insurance on the Affordable Care Act marketplaces.
Ah, okay. And that affects many people.
Millions of legally residing immigrants nationally, the sources say.
And the bill also boosts funding for border enforcement.
Significantly, yes.
Yeah.
The sources mention large increases for more border enforcement, mass deportations. One analysis estimates maybe up to 1 million people deported per year under these provisions.
1 million people.
Yeah. And the material explicitly flags the risk to immigrant families, including the possibility of separating U.S. citizen children from their parents during enforcement.
That's incredibly disruptive. And there was something about the child tax credit, too.
Right. A specific change highlighted in the sources. The bill adds a requirement that you need a Social Security number and SSN to claim the child tax credit.
Okay, and the issue there is?
The analysis in the sources indicates this means about 2 million kids could lose the credit, even if the kids themselves are U.S. citizens, just because a parent doesn't have an SSN.
And who does that tend to affect?
The sources explicitly state this disproportionately harms mixed-status families, often non-white families. A parent might lack an SSN for various reasons, maybe related to immigration status or other issues, and that becomes a barrier for their U.S. citizen child getting the credit.
So the impact there, based on the sources, threats to families staying together, more economic hardship, especially for these mixed-status families.
Precisely. And if you kind of connect all these dots, who's affected by the Medicaid cuts, the S&AP cuts, the immigrant provisions, the sources really synthesize this.
How so?
They report that the analyses show these cuts and changes disproportionately impact Black, Hispanic, and mixed-race families, groups that, according to the material, rely more heavily on programs like Medicaid, S&AP, and child care support.
And what does the analysis say this does to inequality?
The sources state it would likely deepen existing racial and economic inequities, make things worse, especially for Latino and immigrant children who already face high poverty rates.
Is there specific data on the economic impact by income level?
Yes. The material cites analysis showing that households in the lowest income group, the poorest 10%, would see their overall resources decrease by 2% initially, growing to a 4% decrease by 2033.
A decrease, while others are seeing increases from tax cuts.
Primarily because of these reported cuts to benefits like Medicaid and S&P, according to that analysis. So yes, the distributional analysis cited paints that picture. Resources increasing significantly at the top, decreasing at the bottom.
Wow. Okay. So we've looked at who the sources say wins and who they say faces really significant challenges. Let's try and pull this all together now, based on everything in your sources. What's the overall takeaway picture from this material?
Well, what the analyses across these sources consistently seem to suggest is a major shift. The bill would, according to these reports, disproportionately strip away key supports from the most vulnerable groups.
And you mentioned specific groups flagged in the sources.
Yeah, specifically highlighting immigrants, non-white communities, people in poverty, while at the same time providing substantial financial benefits, mainly through tax cuts, to the wealthy. That CBO distributional analysis cited really underscores this reported shift.
The sources also give a bit of historical context, didn't they?
Just briefly, yeah. The material kind of compares parts of this to past laws. Like the 2017 tax cuts analysis also showed those heavily benefited the wealthy.
Right.
And also, like the 1990s welfare reform, which brought in work rules for benefit programs.
Okay.
The sources suggest this bill sort of combines those approaches, maybe even expands them across more programs.
Yeah.
And they also kind of touch on how history, race, class politics, how that's maybe shaped these programs in the U.S.
Okay. And just to be crystal clear for everyone listening, our job here in this deep dive is just to present what the indices in the sources you provided found.
Exactly.
We're showing the different impacts reported in that material. We're not taking sides on whether the bill is good or bad overall.
Nope. Just understanding what the sources say is in it and how they report it affects different people. That's the goal.
And it's important to remember, as the sources note, This bill still has to get through the Senate.
Big hurdles there, yeah.
Mhm.
Changes are expected, the sources say, so the
Mhm.
final version, the final impacts, they could definitely shift. It's not a done deal.
Right. So why should you, listening right now, care about all this? Even if maybe you think, oh, these specific programs or tax cuts, they don't affect me directly.
Well, because change is this big.
Yeah.
Fundamentally altering taxes, healthcare, the social safety net,
Mm-hmm.
they have ripple effects,
Everywhere.
everywhere.
How so?
They impact communities, they constrain hospitals and clinics, they affect state budgets. They really change the whole economic landscape and the kind of support system we have. So understanding these reported dynamics, just based on the analyses and your sources, it gives crucial context for the national conversation that's happening right now about this bill.
Absolutely. Well said. And that brings us towards the end of this deep dive into your sources on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway from reading through all this material is that the analysis consistently indicates this bill would cause a really significant shift in resources,
A shift how?
with the reported benefits heavily concentrated at the very top of the income ladder, while the reductions in support hit hardest on the poorest and most vulnerable populations. That's the core finding presented.
Well, thank you for providing these sources so we could do this. It's really helpful to try and unpack something this complex, relying just on the expert analysis that's been done, as reported in the materials shared.
Agreed. The analyses laid out here, they offer a pretty clear data-driven look, at least at the potential impacts reported in the specific material.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, based purely on what we've explored from these sources. Given that these analyses show such vastly different reported impacts on different groups of people, what does that specific finding itself tell us about the priorities reflected in this bill according to these analyses? And maybe, how might understanding these reported potential outcomes shape the debate as the bill continues its journey, possibly changing in the Senate?
That's definitely a crucial question to keep in mind as this whole process unfolds.
It is, and this has just been one deep dive, of course. Legislation this big, it always has many, many layers. We definitely encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions.